The early morning sun shimmered over the glassy surface of the infinity pool, its golden rays reflecting off the crystalline waters and casting a dazzling glow across the pristine white cabanas. Eleanor Daniels stood at the edge of the pool, her pressed uniform immaculate, her posture perfect. To anyone watching, she was just another maid, tending to the needs of the resort's elite guests. But inside her, a quiet confidence simmered, a stark contrast to the modest role she chose to portray. Eleanor didn't need this job. In fact, the reality was the opposite. Every tile in the pool, every staff member bustling about, and every glass of champagne served at this exclusive resort existed because of her vision and determination. But no one knew this, and that was precisely the way Eleanor preferred it. Running her business incognito allowed her to experience her guests' true personalities and uncover any inefficiencies among her staff. Today, Eleanor was prepared for the arrival of the Millers, a high-profile family whose name carried weight in elite social circles. The patriarch, Charles Miller, was a hedge fund magnate with a reputation for being ruthless in business and dismissive in his personal dealings. His wife, Veronica, was a picture of icy perfection, her platinum blonde hair always styled to flawlessness, her designer outfits chosen to make statements louder than words. Their teenage daughters, Madison and Brooke, were carbon copies of their mother, entitled and oblivious to the privilege they basked in. Lastly, there was Nathan, the youngest and perhaps the most impressionable, a boy of 10 with wide eyes that mirrored an innocence his family had long abandoned. Eleanor spotted their convoy of black SUVs pulling up to the entrance, their tinted windows shielding the Millers from the outside world. The staff lined up, standing tall in their crisp uniforms, ready to greet the VIP guests. Eleanor kept to the side, holding a tray of welcome cocktails, her demeanor calm and unassuming. The first to step out of the SUV was Veronica, her large sunglasses obscuring most of her face, but her tightly pursed lips and slight grimace as she looked around the property revealed her initial judgment. "This is it," she muttered, loud enough for Eleanor to hear but soft enough to feign innocence if confronted. "I expected something grander." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin smile as she lowered her gaze, pretending not to hear. She had grown used to such remarks. The truth was, the resort was as grand as any billionaire could ask for. But people like Veronica Miller often arrived with a chip on their shoulders, determined to prove that nothing was ever good enough for them. Charles exited next, his phone glued to his ear, already barking orders at someone on the other end of the line. He didn't glance at the staff, treating them as invisible. His daughters followed, their designer luggage wheeled by a line of bellboys. Madison and Brooke immediately pulled out their phones, snapping selfies with practiced pouts. "Ugh, the lighting here is so harsh," Brooke complained, squinting at her screen. "Can't they fix that?" Eleanor stepped forward cautiously, offering the tray of cocktails. "Welcome to Paradise Shores," she said warmly. "We've prepared these signature drinks to refresh you after your journey." Veronica's gaze flicked over Eleanor like she was appraising a piece of furniture. She took a glass without a word, her manicured fingers barely brushing Eleanor's hand, as if touching her might tarnish her image. Charles ignored the tray entirely, still engrossed in his call. Madison and Brooke grabbed glasses but didn't bother to thank Eleanor, too busy perfecting their selfies. Nathan was the only one who hesitated. His wide brown eyes met Eleanor's and she offered him a genuine smile. Tentatively, he reached for a glass. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his small voice almost drowned out by his sister's complaints about the heat. Eleanor's smile deepened. "You're very welcome," she replied softly. Nathan's politeness didn't go unnoticed by Veronica, who clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Nathan, don't touch that. You don't know where it's been." Eleanor felt a pang of annoyance but kept her composure. She stepped back, allowing the concierge to guide the family to their private villa. As the staff dispersed, Eleanor caught snippets of their conversation. "This place better have a proper spa," Veronica said, her heels clicking against the stone path. "I don't want any of those amateur massages." "And make sure the Wi-Fi works," Madison chimed in, waving her phone. "I can't have my followers thinking I'm offline." Eleanor exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the tray. Her experience had taught her that the wealthiest clients often brought the most complications, but the Millers already felt like a special case. Once the family settled into their villa, the complaints began almost immediately. Veronica called the front desk 3 times within the first hour, each request more demanding than the last. First, she insisted that the thread count of the sheets wasn't high enough. Then, she demanded fresh orchids for every room, claiming the provided arrangements lacked fragrance. Finally, she declared that the villa's private chef wasn't qualified to meet their dietary needs, even though the chef had graduated from a Michelin-starred restaurant. Eleanor observed it all from a distance, her expression carefully neutral. She had instructed her staff to accommodate the Millers as best they could, but it was clear that nothing short of perfection by the Millers' subjective standards would suffice. Later that afternoon, Eleanor found herself assigned to serve lunch at the family's private cabana. It was an opportunity to get a closer look at how they treated those they deemed beneath them. She approached the table with a tray of artisanal dishes, each meticulously prepared. "Here are your grilled lobster medallions with saffron risotto," she announced, setting the plates down with precision. "I hope you enjoy your meal." Charles glanced up briefly, finally off his phone. "Took you long enough," he muttered, reaching for his fork without so much as a thank you. Madison and Brooke snapped photos of their plates, arranging their food for the perfect shot. It's like, "Too orange," Madison complained. "Do they not know how to make things look good for Instagram?" Veronica pushed her plate aside after a single bite. "This is unacceptable. The lobster is rubbery, and the risotto is bland. Take it back." Eleanor nodded, her jaw tightening. "Of course, Ma, I'll inform the chef immediately." As she turned to leave, she heard Veronica whisper to her husband, "I told you we should have gone to Bali instead. The staff there know how to treat their guests." Eleanor carried the plate back to the kitchen, her thoughts simmering. She had faced clients like this before, people who saw service workers as extensions of their whims rather than human beings. But there was something about the Millers' smug entitlement that struck a deeper chord. It wasn't just their rudeness, it was the implicit belief that their wealth granted them superiority over everyone else. That evening, Eleanor took a moment to herself, standing on the balcony of her private suite. The moon cast a silver glow over the resort, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing backdrop. She allowed herself a small smile. The Millers thought they had her figured out, a lowly maid whose only purpose was to serve them. They had no idea they were standing in a kingdom she had built with her own hands. Eleanor decided she would let the charade continue a little longer. After all, it was often in the moments of assumed power that people revealed their truest selves. The next morning, Eleanor prepared herself for another day of silently observing the Millers. She stood in the service area, sipping a cup of black coffee as the early morning sun painted the resort in hues of pink and gold. From the staff radio chatter, she learned the family had requested an exclusive breakfast setup on the beach, an unusual but not uncommon demand from high-profile guests. By the time Eleanor arrived to oversee the arrangement, the Millers were already there. A long white linen table was set up a few feet from the water, complete with silver cutlery and fresh floral centerpieces. 2 servers moved quickly to accommodate the family, who were sprawled across sun loungers waiting for their meal. "This orange juice is warm," Veronica announced, waving her glass dramatically. "Do you not have refrigeration in this place?" A nervous server rushed to retrieve a fresh pitcher, apologizing profusely. Eleanor stepped in calmly, her eyes scanning the scene. "I'll take care of it," she said to the server with a reassuring nod. Turning to Veronica, Eleanor added, "We'll have a fresh, chilled pitcher here shortly, Ma. Thank you for bringing it to our attention." Veronica barely looked at her, instead turning her attention to Nathan, who was building a sandcastle nearby. "Nathan, don't ruin your clothes. This isn't the playground." Madison and Brooke, meanwhile, lounged with their phones in hand, critiquing photos of their breakfast setup. "The lighting's off," Brooke whined, pointing at the table. "We need the sun behind us, not in front." Madison nodded. "And the food is too far apart. Don't these people know anything about aesthetics?" The staff scrambled to adjust the arrangement as the sisters barked out increasingly specific demands. Eleanor stayed composed, observing the chaos. It was clear that the Millers thrived on commanding attention, treating the staff like pawns in their private spectacle. Charles sat apart from the scene, absorbed in his tablet. When a server accidentally bumped his chair while adjusting the table, he glanced up with a cold glare. "Do you not see me sitting here?" he snapped. Pay attention, for God's sake." The server stammered an apology, retreating quickly. Eleanor felt her jaw tighten but forced herself to remain neutral. Confronting them now would be premature. Instead, she focused on ensuring the breakfast proceeded smoothly. As the meal continued, Veronica's criticisms became more pointed. She sent back 2 dishes, claiming they weren't cooked to her liking, and accused the chef of not understanding fine dining. Eleanor handled each situation with grace, ensuring replacements were brought quickly. Despite Eleanor's best efforts, the tension reached a boiling point when Madison knocked over her smoothie. "Great," she groaned, glaring at the nearest server. "Are you going to clean this, or should I do your job for you?" The young server froze, her face flushing red with embarrassment. Eleanor stepped forward, taking the cloth from the server's hands. "I'll handle it," Eleanor said smoothly, crouching to wipe the spill. As she worked, she felt Madison's gaze on her, cold and dismissive. "Maybe next time hire staff who actually know what they're doing," Madison muttered, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. Eleanor stood slowly, meeting Madison's eyes with a calm but firm expression. "We strive to provide excellent service, Miss Miller. Your feedback is noted." Madison scoffed, turning back to her phone. Eleanor's stomach churned with frustration, but she reminded herself of the bigger picture. She wasn't just a maid here, she was the owner. She had the power to change the narrative on her own terms. Later, as the family strolled back toward their villa, Nathan lingered behind, glancing at Eleanor. "Thank you for cleaning up," he said shyly, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry about my sister." Eleanor knelt to meet his eyes, her expression softening. "That's very kind of you, Nathan. Don't worry about it." He nodded, smiling hesitantly before running to catch up with his family. Eleanor watched him go, her thoughts swirling. Nathan's kindness stood in stark contrast to the rest of his family. It gave her a small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't all beyond redemption. The day ended with Eleanor reflecting on the Millers' behavior. She had seen enough to confirm her initial impression. Entitlement ran deep in this family, but she wasn't ready to expose her hand just yet. For now, she would remain the quiet observer, giving them every opportunity to reveal their true selves. Only then would she decide how to act. Eleanor smiled to herself as she prepared for bed. She was no stranger to dealing with difficult clients, but something about the Millers felt different. Perhaps it was the blatant disrespect they showed, or perhaps it was the challenge of it all. Either way, she knew one thing for certain: they had no idea who they were dealing with. Eleanor started her morning early, as always, walking the grounds of the resort while the world was still waking. The dew on the grass sparkled in the soft sunlight, and the ocean waves whispered a gentle rhythm in the distance. Despite the calm, her mind was already spinning with plans for the day. The Millers were becoming a headache, not just for her, but for the entire staff. They weren't the first difficult guests she'd encountered, but the level of disdain and entitlement they exhibited felt especially grating. At breakfast, Eleanor found herself once again tasked with attending to the Millers personally. Their growing list of demands had left the other staff members frazzled, and Eleanor wanted to shield her team from further harassment. Dressed in her simple maid's uniform, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her observant eyes taking in every detail. The family was seated at a private gazebo overlooking the ocean, a stunning location reserved for the resort's most exclusive guests. Charles was engrossed in his tablet, scrolling through financial news, while Veronica meticulously rearranged the centerpiece on the table, muttering about the horrible choice of flowers. Madison and Brooke were glued to their phones, occasionally bursting into giggles as they scrolled through social media. Nathan sat quietly, doodling on the back of a menu. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Miller," Eleanor greeted warmly, setting down a tray of freshly baked pastries. "We've prepared a selection of our finest breakfast items today. Please let me know if there's anything else you need." Veronica barely acknowledged her, waving a hand dismissively. "We'll see if it's edible first," she said coldly. Eleanor maintained her composure. "Of course, Ma am. Enjoy your meal." As she turned to leave, Brooke's voice rang out. "Hey, maid lady, what's your name again?" Eleanor paused, turning back with a calm smile. "Eleanor, miss." "Eleanor," Brooke repeated, her tone dripping with mockery. "Do you actually eat this stuff, or do you get, like, different food for the staff?" Madison snickered. Yeah, like leftovers or something. Eleanor's smile didn't falter, though her patience was wearing thin. The kitchen provides meals for the staff, yes, but I assure you, everything served here is prepared with the same care. Good to know, Brooke said, smirking as she took a sip of her orange juice. Eleanor excused herself, walking back toward the main dining area. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, but she took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay composed. It wasn't the first time she'd endured such comments, and it wouldn't be the last. Still, the Millers' behavior felt particularly personal, as if they reveled in testing her limits. As the morning unfolded, the family's demands only escalated. Veronica summoned Eleanor to their villa multiple times, each request more unreasonable than the last. She complained about the villa's lack of ambience, insisting that the staff rearrange the furniture and replace the artwork with pieces more suited to her taste. Madison and Brooke refused to leave their rooms for the scheduled yoga session, declaring it too boring and demanded that a private instructor be brought to their suite instead. By lunchtime, the resort staff was on edge. Eleanor overheard two servers whispering in the staff break room, their voices hushed but filled with frustration. "I can't take much more of this," one of them said. "Mrs. Miller sent me back to the kitchen 3 times because her salad wasn't green enough. What does that even mean?" "I know," the other replied, "and her daughters are just as bad. They act like we're their personal servants." Eleanor stepped in, her presence silencing the conversation. She placed a reassuring hand on the first server's shoulder. "You're doing a great job," she said. "I'll handle the Millers for the rest of the day. Take a break and don't let them get to you." The server nodded gratefully, and Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about managing the Millers anymore, it was about protecting her team from their mistreatment. The afternoon brought an unexpected development. Charles approached Eleanor directly for the first time, his usually aloof demeanor replaced by a thinly veiled frustration. "Eleanor, is it?" he asked, his tone curt. "Yes, sir. How can I assist you?" she replied, maintaining her polite professionalism. "I need a private meeting room for a video conference," he said. "Your so-called business center is completely inadequate. There's no way I'm taking a call with investors in that shoebox." Eleanor resisted the urge to roll her eyes. The resort's business center was state-of-the-art, equipped with everything a professional could need. But she knew better than to argue. "I'll see what I can do, Mr. Miller. I'll have the team prepare a more suitable space for you." "Good," he said, barely acknowledging her before walking away. Eleanor quickly arranged for a luxurious private cabana to be converted into a temporary meeting room, complete with high-speed Wi-Fi, a large monitor, and a selection of refreshments. When Charles arrived for his call, he seemed momentarily impressed, though he didn't say so outright. As the day wore on, Eleanor found herself juggling an endless stream of tasks, each one more taxing than the last. Yet through it all, she maintained her composure, her inner strength fueled by the knowledge that she held the ultimate authority. The Millers might see her as a mere maid, but she knew the truth, and that truth gave her the patience to endure their worst behavior. That evening, Eleanor decided to conduct a discreet inspection of the villa, curious to see how the family's true dynamics played out behind closed doors. She had installed security measures throughout the resort not to invade privacy, but to ensure the safety of her guests and staff. With the Millers, however, her motivations were more personal. She needed to understand them on a deeper level if she was going to navigate their behavior effectively. What she discovered surprised her. In the privacy of their villa, the Millers weren't the united, confident family they appeared to be. Charles was irritable and distant, snapping at Veronica over trivial matters. Veronica, in turn, vented her frustrations on Madison and Brooke, criticizing their outfits, their social media habits, and even their posture. Nathan seemed to shrink in their presence, retreating to his room whenever the tension escalated. Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy for the youngest Miller. It was clear he didn't share his family's sense of entitlement. In fact, he seemed to carry the weight of their dysfunction on his small shoulders. For the first time, Eleanor saw the cracks in the Millers' facade, and she realized that their behavior toward her and her staff wasn't just about arrogance. It was a reflection of their own insecurities and unhappiness. As Eleanor returned to her private quarters that night, she reflected on the day's events. The Millers were testing her patience, but they were also revealing their vulnerabilities. She knew she could use this insight to her advantage. The family's arrogance might be their greatest weakness, and Eleanor was more than ready to turn the tables when the time was right. For now, she would continue playing her role, quietly observing and preparing. The Millers had no idea who they were dealing with, and Eleanor intended to keep it that way at least for a little while longer. Eleanor's instincts told her that the Millers would soon push the limits of her patience and the staff's professionalism. She didn't have to wait long. That evening they requested a private dinner on the beach, an extravagant affair involving a multi-course meal prepared by the resort's top chefs. Eleanor took it upon herself to oversee the event, knowing the family's penchant for finding faults in even the most meticulous arrangements. The dining area was set under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights strung between two palm trees. The table was adorned with fresh orchids, candles and glass lanterns, and polished silverware that reflected the soft glow of the lights. A light breeze carried the scent of the sea, and the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a serene soundtrack. By the time the Millers arrived, the staff had ensured that every detail was perfect. Eleanor stood nearby, discreetly observing as the family took their seats. Charles looked unimpressed, glancing around with a disapproving air. Veronica muttered something under her breath, her expression one of mild irritation. Madison and Brooke immediately pulled out their phones, snapping pictures for social media. "Not bad," Madison said, tilting her head to get the perfect angle. "But it's a little basic, don't you think?" Brooke nodded. "Yeah, where's the wow factor? I've seen influencers post better setups at backyard barbecues." Veronica sighed dramatically. "Honestly, I don't know why I expected more. This is supposed to be a 5-star resort." Eleanor resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Instead, she stepped forward, maintaining her polite demeanor. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, Miss Madison, Miss Brooke, Master Nathan. Tonight's menu has been specially curated by our executive chef. I hope you enjoy the experience." Charles waved her off dismissively. "Let's just get on with it." The first course was a delicate amuse-bouche of seared scallops with a citrus glaze, paired with a chilled glass of Sauvignon Blanc. The chef himself brought the dish to the table, explaining its preparation in detail. "This is supposed to be hot," Veronica said, poking at the scallop with her fork. "Why is it barely warm?" The chef, a seasoned professional with years of experience, blinked in surprise. "The dish is meant to be served at this temperature, ma.am. It enhances the flavors of the glaze." "Well, it's not enhancing anything for me," Veronica snapped, pushing the plate away. "Take it back." Eleanor stepped in quickly, gesturing for the chef to return to the kitchen. "I'll ensure it's adjusted to your preference, ma.am," she said smoothly. The second course, a lobster bisque, fared no better. Madison complained that it was too rich, while Brooke declared it tasteless. Nathan, however, quietly sipped his soup, glancing nervously at his family as they berated the servers. By the time the main course arrived, a choice of filet mignon or roasted sea bass, the atmosphere was tense. Veronica loudly criticized the plating, Charles complained about the portion sizes, and Madison claimed her steak was undercooked despite it being prepared exactly as she had requested. The staff worked tirelessly to address each complaint, but the Millers seemed determined to find fault in everything. Eleanor could see the frustration building in her team, their forced smiles beginning to waver. She herself felt the strain, but she knew she couldn't lose her composure, not yet. The tipping point came during dessert. The chef had prepared a stunning chocolate souffle, its rich aroma filling the air as it was brought to the table. But as a server set the dish in front of Veronica, her elbow accidentally brushed against Veronica's glass of wine, spilling a few drops onto the edge of the tablecloth. Veronica gasped, recoiling as if she'd been doused with boiling water. "Are you serious?" she shrieked, glaring at the server. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? Do you even look where you're going?" The server stammered an apology, her face flushing red. Eleanor stepped forward immediately, her tone calm but firm. "I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience, Mrs. Miller. Allow me to assist." "Inconvenience?" Veronica snapped. "This is unacceptable. I want this cleaned up now, and I want to know why you employ such incompetent staff." Eleanor maintained her composure, signaling to another server to bring a fresh tablecloth. I assure you, ma'am, we will resolve this promptly. Thank you for your patience. Veronica scoffed, crossing her arms. Patience? You expect me to be patient when I'm being treated like this? Madison and Brooke giggled behind their hands while Charles shook his head in irritation. This is why I hate these so-called luxury resorts, he muttered. They're all the same, overpriced and underwhelming. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she forced a serene smile. We strive to provide the best experience possible, Mr. Miller. If there's anything more we can do, please let me know. Veronica leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she studied Eleanor. You seem very eager to defend your staff, she said coldly. Maybe you should focus less on excuses and more on hiring people who know what they're doing. For a brief moment, Eleanor considered dropping her facade and revealing her true position. But she quickly dismissed the thought. It wasn't time yet. Instead, she nodded politely, excusing herself to supervise the cleanup. As the Millers continued their meal, Eleanor stood in the shadows, observing. The staff worked tirelessly to salvage the evening, but the damage had been done. The Millers were determined to remain dissatisfied, their complaints growing more ridiculous with each passing minute. Eleanor's patience was wearing thin, but she reminded herself of the bigger picture. The Millers' arrogance was on full display, and the more they revealed about themselves, the better prepared she would be to turn the tables when the time came. For now, she would let them believe they were in control. But deep down, she knew the balance of power was already beginning to shift. The following morning, the resort buzzed with activity. Guests relaxed by the pool, children played on the beach, and couples strolled hand in hand along the shore. Yet beneath the surface of Paradise Shore's serene facade, tensions simmered. The staff moved briskly but cautiously, their whispers filled with tales of the Millers' previous night's tirade. Despite the chaos they had caused, Eleanor remained calm, meticulously planning her next move. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. The Millers stormed into the lobby mid-morning, Veronica leading the charge with a look of practiced outrage. She clutched her designer handbag like a weapon, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Behind her, Charles wore his usual scowl, while Madison and Brooke followed with exaggerated pouts. Nathan trailed behind, his head lowered. I want to speak to someone in charge right now, Veronica declared, her voice echoing across the lobby. The concierge, visibly flustered, glanced toward Eleanor, who stood to the side in her maid's uniform, watching the scene unfold. She stepped forward, her expression neutral but her mind sharp as a blade. Good morning, Mrs. Miller, Eleanor said smoothly. How may I assist you? Veronica's eyes narrowed. You can't. I need a manager, or better yet, the owner of this place. Someone who actually has the authority to address these issues. Charles crossed his arms. This resort is a joke. The service is terrible, the staff is incompetent, and the accommodations are nowhere near the standard we were promised. Eleanor nodded, her gaze steady. I understand your concerns, Mr. Miller. Allow me to address them. Address them, Veronica sneered. I doubt you even know what that means. You're just a maid. Eleanor's smile didn't falter, though her patience was razor thin. She straightened her posture, her presence suddenly commanding. Mrs. Miller, I assure you I am more than qualified to address your concerns. In fact, I am the owner of this resort. For a moment, silence fell over the lobby. Veronica blinked, her mouth opening and closing as if she were trying to process Eleanor's words. Charles's expression shifted from disdain to disbelief, while Madison and Brooke exchanged wide-eyed glances. That's impossible, Veronica scoffed, her voice losing some of its venom. You're lying. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. I built this resort from the ground up. Every detail, from the design of the villas to the training of the staff, reflects my vision. I take great pride in ensuring that every guest has an exceptional experience, which is why I've been personally observing your stay. Charles's scowl deepened. You expect us to believe this? You've been pretending to be a maid this whole time? What kind of game are you playing? No game, Eleanor replied evenly. I often work incognito to understand how guests treat my staff and to ensure that our service meets the highest standards. It also allows me to see the true nature of my clientele. Veronica's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. So what? You've been spying on us. I prefer to think of it as observing, Eleanor said. Her tone remained composed, but there was a steeliness in her gaze. And what I've observed is deeply troubling. Your behavior toward my staff has been nothing short of demeaning. You've treated them as if they're beneath you, when in fact, they've shown you nothing but professionalism and respect. Madison let out a nervous laugh. This has to be a joke, right? Like there's no way you're the owner. Eleanor turned her gaze to the teenager, her voice softening but losing none of its authority. It's no joke, Miss Madison. And I suggest you take this moment to reflect on how you've conducted yourself. People aren't props for your social media posts. They deserve dignity and kindness, regardless of their role. Veronica bristled. How dare you lecture us? We're paying guests. Yes, you are, Eleanor said, her tone sharper now. But being a paying guest does not give you the right to mistreat my staff or disrupt the experience of other guests. This resort was designed to be a haven of relaxation and respect. Unfortunately, your behavior has violated that principle. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, glancing up at Eleanor. We're sorry, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Eleanor's gaze softened as she looked at the boy. Thank you, Nathan. I can see you understand the value of respect. Perhaps you can teach your family a thing or two. The comment hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. Charles clenched his jaw, his face red with humiliation. Veronica opened her mouth to retort but seemed to think better of it. For the first time, the Millers appeared truly speechless. Eleanor took a step back, her composure unwavering. You're welcome to stay for the remainder of your booking, provided you treat my staff with the respect they deserve. However, if you're unable to meet that standard, I'll have no choice but to ask you to leave. The silence stretched as the Millers processed her words. Finally, Veronica let out a huff, grabbing her handbag and turning toward the elevators. Come on, she snapped at her family. We're leaving. Charles hesitated, glancing at Eleanor one last time before following his wife. Madison and Brooke trailed behind, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. Nathan lingered for a moment, looking up at Eleanor with wide, apologetic eyes. Thank you, he said softly before hurrying to catch up with his family. Eleanor watched them go, a small smile playing on her lips. She turned to the staff, who had gathered nearby, their expressions a mix of awe and relief. Back to work, everyone, she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority. Let's make today better for the rest of our guests. As the staff dispersed, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Millers had finally been put in their place, and though the encounter had been tense, it had reaffirmed the value she had built her resort upon: dignity, respect, and the belief that true luxury began with kindness. The sun was setting over Paradise Shores, casting a warm orange glow across the resort as Eleanor stood on the balcony of her private office. She watched as the Millers' luggage was loaded into a waiting SUV, their departure hurried and unceremonious. The tension of the morning confrontation had lifted, but Eleanor knew her work wasn't finished. The encounter had left a mark, not only on her but on the staff and even the Millers themselves. Later that evening, Eleanor joined the resort staff in the dining hall, where a small celebration was underway. It wasn't a formal event, just a moment for her team to relax after what had been an unusually challenging few days. Laughter and chatter filled the room as the chefs brought out plates of their finest dishes, and the bartenders served signature cocktails. Eleanor moved through the crowd, checking in with each of her employees, ensuring they felt valued and supported. Thank you for stepping in earlier, Eleanor said. Maria, one of the senior servers. I don't know how you stayed so calm with Mrs. Miller yelling like that. Eleanor smiled warmly. It's not about matching their tone, Maria. It's about showing them we won't be diminished. You all handled yourselves with grace, and I couldn't be prouder. The staff murmured their agreement, and the atmosphere grew lighter. Eleanor raised her glass, the clinking drawing everyone's attention. To the finest team I've ever had the privilege of working with, she said. This resort wouldn't be what it is without each of you. Here's to resilience, respect, and the joy we bring to our guests every day. Cheers erupted, and glasses were raised. Eleanor's heart swelled as she saw the pride on her team's faces. Moments like these reminded her why she had built Paradise Shores in the first place, not for the wealth or recognition, but for the community it created. Meanwhile, in one of the resort's guest lounges, the Millers sat in silence, waiting for their driver to arrive. The air between them was heavy with unspoken tension. Veronica sat stiffly on a leather sofa, scrolling through her phone with a furrowed brow, while Charles stared out the window, his expression unreadable. Madison and Brooke were unusually quiet, their phones lying untouched on the coffee table. Nathan sat apart from the group, scribbling in his notebook. "You've been quiet," Charles finally said, breaking the silence. "What are you drawing?" Nathan hesitated, then turned his notebook around to show a sketch of the resort's beach, complete with the fairy lights and the waves lapping at the shore. In the corner of the drawing, he had included a small figure of a maid standing tall and proud. "It's the lady," Nathan said softly. "The one who helped us. The one who owns the place." Veronica glanced at the drawing, her lips tightening. "Why would you draw her?" Nathan shrugged. "Because she was nice, and she was right." Madison scoffed. "What do you mean, she was right?" Nathan looked at his sisters, his young face serious. "She said we should treat people better, and I think she's right. We were mean. I didn't like it." Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding his son's gaze. Veronica said nothing, but her posture stiffened, and she turned back to her phone. Madison and Brooke exchanged glances, neither willing to acknowledge their brother's words. Outside, Eleanor strolled along the beach, enjoying the cool evening breeze. She often walked here at the end of the day, reflecting on her decisions and the impact of her work. Tonight felt different, though. The confrontation with the Millers had left her drained, but it had also reaffirmed her purpose. As she rounded a bend in the path, she noticed a small figure sitting on a rock near the water. It was Nathan, clutching his notebook. Eleanor hesitated, then approached him quietly. "Mind if I join you?" she asked gently. Nathan looked up, startled, but then nodded. "Okay." Eleanor sat beside him, the waves lapping at their feet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nathan held out his notebook, showing her the sketch. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, genuinely impressed. "You have a real talent." Nathan smiled shyly. "Thanks. I wanted to draw it before we left." Eleanor looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, Nathan, kindness isn't always easy, but it's one of the most important things we can give to others." He nodded slowly. "I know. I don't like it when my family's mean to people, but I don't know how to stop it." Eleanor placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're already doing it, Nathan. By speaking up, by treating people with respect, you're showing them a better way. That's how change starts." Nathan's face brightened and he nodded again, more confidently this time. "I'll try." The next morning, the Millers left the resort without much fanfare. As the SUV pulled away, Eleanor stood at the entrance, watching them go. She caught a glimpse of Nathan waving at her through the window, and she raised her hand in return. It was a small gesture, but it gave her hope that perhaps the boy would carry the lessons of their time at Paradise Shores with him. In the weeks that followed, life at the resort returned to its usual rhythm. The Millers became a distant memory, a cautionary tale for the staff about the challenges of dealing with difficult guests. Yet for Eleanor, their stay lingered in her mind not as a source of frustration, but as a reminder of the power of dignity and perseverance. One evening, as she sat on her balcony overlooking the ocean, Eleanor received an unexpected letter. The envelope was addressed to her personally, and the handwriting was unmistakably childlike. Inside was a simple drawing of the resort, with a note scrawled in careful letters. "Dear Miss Eleanor, thank you for being so kind to me. I'll try to be kind too, even when it's hard. You're the best part of the resort. Sincerely, Nathan Miller." Eleanor's heart swelled as she read the note, her eyes misting with tears. She carefully placed the letter on her desk, a smile spreading across her face. In that moment, she knew that the effort, the patience, and the challenges were all worth it. If even one person could leave her resort with a new perspective, then she had accomplished something far greater than luxury or profit. She had created a space where people could grow, learn, and find a piece of their humanity. As the waves crashed against the shore below, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, content. Paradise Shores was more than just a resort, it was a testament to the strength of kindness. the resilience of the human spirit, and the power of standing tall in the face of adversity. And in her heart, Eleanor knew that this was only the beginning.